Why do you think social media can be so harmful for our mental health?
That's a big question right out of the gate. But there's a lot happening on social media that I think is a reflection of what's happened with people offline for a very long time. And if you think about it, the things that stress you out about social media, maybe not all of them, but many of them are things that would have stressed you out if they happened offline, like the experience of comparison and comparing yourself to others all of the time, no matter what age, by the way. It just happens to be a little bit more accentuated with it when you're in puberty. But oh, they've got a house, or wow, they're always on vacation. That experience really, the degree to which that happened caused a decline in people's mental health even before social media. But now you add on, it's always on, directly linked to you. You spend hours a day staring at you. And then you've got a number that makes you think it's an objective comparison with likes and stuff like this, but it's really anything but. Comparison is just one of those areas. Other things that would kind of harm our mental health or stress us out would be things like seeing traumatic imagery or negative news stories repeatedly. That would, if you spent an hour on the news, even on TV, you would feel more stressed after and you'd be wondering why. But now you're doing it for 2 to 3 hours a day. And every time you open a feed, you don't know what you're going to see. So I was so glad to join you in this conversation because I actually really classify social media as a risky behavior, like other risky behaviors, like sex or drugs or alcohol or even driving. And perhaps we can chat a little bit more about that, but that is really a really helpful framing for everyone who's listening.
Like, what are the downstream effects that would lead you to want to classify it as a risky behavior?
Yeah, so in psychology, we would judge a risky behavior fairly simply as something where when you participate, you expose yourself to potential harm. And there's a lot of those that you've talked about with other guests on this podcast. Is there potential harm from drinking wine? Yes, there is. We know this, absolutely. And we've known this for a lot of time. But that doesn't mean that you can't add safeguards, understand yourself, understand the environment, really all of these sorts of things that will help you have a better relationship with a risky behavior. Same thing when it comes to driving. Very early on, because it was over a decade ago that I started researching this stuff, it was clear that, oh, okay, some people, when they go on social media or when they spend time on Instagram, they're feeling worse off after. They're not feeling good about themselves. Okay, well, what are some of these things that are causing negative affect or not feeling good about yourself? Maybe they compare themselves more, as we mentioned. Maybe they feel stress after. Maybe they feel lonely. Maybe they're feeling the fear of missing out, the traumatic imagery, PTSD, because you don't really know what you're going to come across in a scroll. So if all of these risks are are a potential experience that you will have every time you log on to social media, then it is a risky behavior. And we haven't even gotten into, cyberbullying, harassment, all those other ones that feel much more intentional in that. And then you go to the next phase. So if there is potential risk of using, it's a risky behavior. That's almost the most simple definition that you could give. However, even similarly to other risky behaviors, there are elements of this risk called social media that are designed to keep you addicted, even in a subconscious way. And if I said that to you about alcohol, you would say, you know what? That is probably a very similar definition. And we know now, now it's just public knowledge how these platforms are designed with behavioral psychologists and behavioral change experts in order to make you act in certain ways, think in certain ways. Advertisers are literally paying their dollars to make you think and act in a certain way and delivered to you on these platforms. And then, you may have heard the phrase the race to the bottom of the brainstem. They're also making money on having you spend your attention on these platforms. So, if I was telling you that there is a risky behavior that is also subconsciously wins when you are addicted and you may not even subconsciously know that this is happening, we would be saying, oh, well, maybe we should consider talking about this like we talk about other risky behaviors. And I actually think that in my work, I have found that to be a more useful framing for people in their daily life than simply talking about social media like, oh, the computer and this is a new technology, or the radio and TV, it's new communications technology. No, it's also something else.
How do you see social media like impacting people's psychology and brain? Like, I know what drugs do and how it like increases the dopamine, it increases like the feel good chemicals in some ways, and it helps with, like, reducing emotional pain. Like, how do you view social media's impact on the brain?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because I'm really glad you said something there, the last one, which was that it can also have a positive effect in many ways. And even though, of course, a lot of what I talk about in the TED Talk and a lot of what people are concerned about are the concerns, like what can this do to me and how can it affect me negatively? But I think it's also important to mention that there are a lot of positive experiences from social media. And in my master's research, what came out was that people had negative experiences as a result of using Instagram, but there were some people that also had positive experiences. It also improved their mental health. And that's what I as a researcher am more interested in because I want to make it so that, well, wait, are they doing that gets those positive experiences, and how can we recreate that or do more of that so people can get the good without the bad, the more of the benefits with less of the risk. And so as we go through the rest of our conversation, I'll probably talk good and bad throughout the rest. So how can it affect our brain? Well, there's really a lot of ways actually. If we're talking simply about addiction, then this one might come from, as you noted, the release of things like oxytocin or dopamine when you feel like you have done something good. And when you've had that like or that share, or someone has given you something that makes you feel meaningful in a direct message. The younger you are, the more risky this behavior is, just like any risky behavior, because your brain is not done growing, and therefore how you are training it, the patterns you are showing it, and how you experience a success or how you experience that dopamine matters more. So you now have this generation that has been trained even in a subconscious way to see this as something that releases dopamine. So that, I think, that point that you made has actually become more important over time, if you ask me, because you've been training it younger and younger in the brain. So that's one way. I mean, even the experience of using like mobile technology has an impact on the brain when you start getting into doctors that want to talk about eye health and eye strain and what does it mean to have blue light before you go to bed. And these are all things that would affect the brain. So the eye strain is that you're seeing more and more people are nearsighted because we're spending so much of our time on screens like this or screens like this that are all very close to us. So when you actually have to, they'll say, part of your health, which I would include your brain in that, is to look beyond the screen kind of as much as you can and to do all this stuff. So it's kind of having other effects on us as well. I personally think I mentioned PTSD and trauma on social media. This is a huge part of using as well. That's going to have an impact on your brain. There is a negativity bias to news, and people tend to click on that more. And that happened long before social media. It kind of stokes up an oh my gosh. And if you ask me, kind of older in evolution, even in the brain, it would be those negative stories that makes your brain think, I need to know what's going on here in order to protect myself. I think that would be an old evolutionary trait. It's negative news and negative stories, they go into our long-term brain much quicker as well. They go into our long-term memory. And the reason why evolutionarily you could think was it was more important for us to remember that this plant is going to kill you than that this plant tastes good. And so to keep us safe and alive, we would remember that stuff. It would stand out more and it would go into our long-term memory quicker. Now you enter the world of social media where this negativity bias is still with us. We still have kind of a version 7 brain in a version 13 world. And you're seeing all this stuff, you click on it, you may not even realize that you've been drawn to it, but you know what remembers that you've been drawn to it? The algorithm. Seeing this level of trauma and negative news to that degree personalized to you and not knowing what you're going to see when you open up a feed, to me has a long-term impact on the brain. It could be desensitization to this stuff. One thing that I've noticed in people and that makes me sad a little bit is uh, people becoming less trustful of other humans, period, and also less belief that humans can be good. And on one side, I know why they think this way. Every time they open up everything that they consume, it's about all the things that humans are doing wrong. But I feel myself, very privileged in my life these days to have been able to travel all over the world. And through the kind of work that I do, as I own an education company, so we literally get to indulge in deep conversations with people on the regular about their lives. And I will say to this day, most people are good. I know that we went on a little bit of a tangent there from how does it affect your brain, but I think how you experience life, society, how you get these stories, how they stay in your brain and your memory longer affects your mental health. Because how you perceive other humans around you affects how you feel about yourself and what it means to be you in this world.
Yeah. Do you think there's a minimum dose of social media or scrolling that can be problematic for the brain or mental health? Because I've noticed in my own personal experience, if I check like my screen time or time spent on social media, if I've spent 10, 20, 30% more than I'm used to, I definitely feel more anxious, more stressed, my sleep's off. I'm also wondering, like, is there like a minimum dose that you found that people should try to adhere to?
Interesting. So, can I ask when you notice that you're like 20, 30% over regular use, does the anxiety, did you feel that before you saw the number, or is it as a result of seeing the number?
No, definitely before. I didn't look at it and be like, oh, you piece of crap. Like, I can't believe you spent that much time on it. It's more like, wow, I feel like sometimes my eyes will hurt or I'll feel like a little bit of burnout, get anxious. And it's tough. And I want to get into this because since you've done your TED talk, there is currency in social media. Like people make a living by living on social media. For me, as for what I do, the more my following grows, the more money I can make with brand deals and stuff, right? So it's tough. It's a tough like balance because when you're full time as a creator, you're on all the time. You're not just like looking at photos of your family anymore, right? So I'd love for you to unpack like a lot of what I just said.
Okay, yeah, we'll go through one part at a time. The reason why I was asking about which part of the experience made you feel anxiety was because I think that you have already identified something like a higher level of self-awareness than I see in many people. And that's one of the steps. I talked about 4 steps towards safe social in my TED talk, but actually it's 5 now, and it's because there have been developments since 2017, of course. And you identified that, oh, you associated something like feeling eye strain or having bad sleeps. And you said to yourself, wait a second, I have known this before that that is a symptom of engaging in too much social media. So then that told you to go check your phone and see if your time levels have aligned with that. And I would say that already what you just said is probably very helpful for people listening, that there are symptoms that you are probably experiencing that you did not realize were a symptom of using social media. If you are feeling eye strain, go check those numbers. If you are having bad sleeps and you have, oh my gosh, I've eaten well and I went to the bathroom before I went to bed and all these things, I would absolutely consider checking your social media use. Other ones I would say are, I'm just feeling so anxious and I just can't figure out why, or why do I feel like the whole world is falling apart every day? I would say these are also symptoms of heavy social media use that is not designed well, because you can design your feed in so much as you can. You can design it to be something that serves you. And I mentioned earlier that there are a ton of positive experiences here as well. And even when I go into classrooms as young as grade 4, which is around 10 years old, I'll say, why are you here then? And they can name all of the risks, but they'll also say, well, this is where I talk to my friends. This is where I learn things. I see experiences unlike my own. I get inspiration. I get motivation. A lot of them even say, this is how I contribute to causes that are important to me. This always comes up in a young classroom, actually, because they don't have any other means to help causes that are important to them. They don't have money. They don't have time. They can't show up. They can't go protest. And so for them, social media is different than adults. It's not just, oh, my online self and my offline self. It's like this just is self. It is all the same thing. So that's kind of one aspect of what you noted there. But then the second one is for people for whom engaging in this risky behavior is part of their job. And that is a really, really interesting note. And it's always come up. And the thing is, it's part of my job too. I understand it and I relate to it. Building a personal brand, connecting with people, especially if you have any sort of global audience or your business services people that are global. Like in a way, social media has solved a large part of that problem through things like LinkedIn, and people can know what I'm up to. The way I think about it, and I think that this does relate differently when you experience it in your own brain, is that seeing social media as the personal extension of your identity is going to register a little bit differently than if you see yourself as a business, and every business has marketing, and therefore social media is a tool that you use to market the business of you. And I'm telling you, even that framing is going to make you think differently about how you use social media. You hopefully you're adding, hopefully you are getting to be authentic in your social media use, but that authenticity might include, well, then my audience is going to understand when I need to take a break or when I might have help on social media. Because if you're noticing that you're engaging with this risky behavior, you are experiencing too many of the risks, you might need help. You might need somebody on the team that does a bit of marketing support for the business of you. And that can be really anyone. You could pay a lot, you could pay a little. You could say, your job is to review messages. I guess we're talking more like people like this is really your job now. People like you and I, where it's like you have people to review the messages, and if they're hate messages, they don't get to you. It's really actually not useful to you. Maybe they block comments, and it's not blocking comments because you don't want to see the truth. It's because you have committed to creating a positive digital environment for all the people you serve online. That's how I actually see it. Because when you create a community on social media, you are inviting someone to come into your space, and in my opinion you have some responsibility in what happens in that space. You cannot control everything else that they see on social media, but what you can certainly control is what it is like to be in your space. And if that means that you have somebody who removes hate comments, that screens you from seeing this stuff so that you do not get dragged down by this risk, that I would consider that a function of any business. Let's see. In addition, I think that step 4 in the steps towards safe social is modeling good behavior or leading by example. And I think a lot of folks don't realize that when you're on these networks, how you use the networks is a very big contributor to the overall social media ecosystem that everyone else operates in. So I was kind of talking there a little bit about how when people are in your digital community, but the overall social media community, what it's like to have a scroll on LinkedIn is actually created by all of us. And if everyone understood, if this might sound wild at first. Oh my gosh, everybody, because people have distrust in other humans right now. But if everyone understood their responsibility to the digital ecosystem, to how people experience half of their life, and when you go younger, remember, they don't see it as different, that's just how they experience life, then we would probably take some more responsibility in how we comment on a celebrity's photo, because that's not just the celebrity that sees. In fact, the celebrity is not reading that 100%. They're not reading it. But you know what makes everybody else do? It makes everybody else think that humans suck, and it ruins their experience of the online world.
And there's so much to unpack there. I know like one of the steps you talk about is like curating your feed for a positive experience. And I think that's a great idea. I also know that people still can internally be struggling, and maybe they went through a recent breakup, or they went through a job loss, or maybe they just lost a bunch of money, or something happens negative. And they're like, okay, I'm going to start following nothing but positive, inspirational quote accounts. And then you start to see some of these quotes and these things that are happening. Like, wait a second, like, how am I ever going to get there? How am I ever going to have this happy relationship when I was just in a toxic relationship? How am I ever going to, manifest my way to becoming wealthy when I just lost my job and now I'm broke? Talk a bit about the importance of people actually working on themselves instead of blaming social media. which social media obviously can throw add gasoline to the fire if you're not careful. But the importance of people actually working on themselves, taking responsibility for their own behavior and their own actions as it relates to what we're talking about with social media.
Oh, I'm just so glad you said that, Doug, because you actually mentioned like three of the steps in one. And the thing is, step one is under building awareness and understanding, period. And that includes awareness of yourself, right? We already talked about that a little bit. And what you mentioned at the beginning was step two, which was moderate your consumption. And how you moderate that, and in response to how you are feeling and what is going on in your life, is when you move to step two. And I think what is a really tough thing for people to wrap their head around, even time wise, is that you change. Like your life changes, and how you're experiencing life after the breakup and before the breakup and after the job loss and before the job loss is different. What you're going to need from your environments then is different, and the curation of those environments might look a little bit different too. The same couple that inspired you and was goals 1 month ago is now making you feel bad about yourself. They've become a risk in that risky behavior. And it's kind of like, I know this sounds a little trite, but it helps me to think about it like other risky behaviors where, you know, if it was, I don't know, a glass of wine or something like that, that would have affected me differently 5 months, 5 years ago than it does today. I have changed, therefore my consumption habits need to change too. But then, most important thing about what you said is step number three, which is to build the offline soft skills. Because actually, what came up in my in that same master's research about people's good and bad experiences and what made it good and what made it bad was the number one most important thing was how people felt about themselves offline at time of use indicated whether or not they would have a good or bad experience and how good or how bad. And this is really important because it meant that the skills that you have offline, regardless of what happens on social media in a day, are actually the most important. So you hit that right on the head there. Because if you have self awareness, if you're building this up, forget about social media, you're just building this up in general, you are going to then enter this risky world and you're going to know the kinds of things that stress you out. You're going to be able to quickly identify, as you did, that I have been having sleep issues. Wait a second, this might be because of social media. Wait a second, I just had a breakup. I am more at risk because offline I am mentally not feeling good. Is that the moment to be engaging in this risky behavior? And if we were talking about anything else and you were already at risk offline, then the likelihood, what I'm telling you, what came out of my research is that if you're not feeling good about yourself offline, you are more likely to not feel good about yourself online. And it is more likely to be a bad experience where you see the worst of people and the exact same piece of content that you looked at 1 month ago in a different circumstance hits you differently and hits you negatively. If you build resilience offline, nothing to do with social media, this is a skill that follows you into the world of social media because you don't know what you're going to see. And so the ability to bounce back and to thrive and to kind of integrate who you are now and integrate those experiences follows you online. If you build things like time management, you don't find yourself an hour later, not remembering what you did. If you build mindfulness, you don't find yourself an hour later not remembering what you did. These are skills that absolutely follow you online. And my favorite one that I see you help people a lot with, which I really love here, is that when you have a goal, literally any goal, something that you are trying to achieve. It can be personal fitness. What came up in my work a lot with young people is if they are trying to graduate, if they are working towards an exam that they have, if someone has a report at work, they have things that they want to do with their family this summer and that they're really into, or they're renovating their house and that's a hobby that they have. If you have any interests and goals, these people are much more likely to have a positive experience on social media. And the reason why, well, it might sound obvious now, but they are able to design an experience that actually serves their goals. And then the that's one part of it. The other half of it was that when you feel good in life, when you have made some progress and you did spend that day with your kid that you've been planning for a while, and you did finish that exam and you did get some studying in, and actually going to the gym was quite a very literal example that came out of my participants. Like if I went to the gym that day and I feel good about myself, then I go on social media and I see a fitness model and I think hashtag goals. But if I didn't go that day and I feel dusty, then I go on and think I hate my life. So very much very important is, I would say, though it seems counterintuitive, if you take nothing else away from this podcast, is work on yourself offline, and I promise you, you will have a better online experience.
One of the biggest risks I see and how it can dramatically impact somebody's mental health, sense of well-being, identity. Years ago, there was the FOMO of, okay, I saw my friends out at a party that I wasn't invited to. I may feel bad about myself. I saw a family on a family vacation that I wanted to take my kids on, kind of feel bad about myself. Now, with filters, Photoshop, the ability to like edit your life online, you can legitimately not do those things, but portray that you're actually doing them. You can portray that you're thinner. You can portray that your face might look a little bit different. You can portray that you're in a private plane, whatever it is. And now people start to lose themselves because now they're morphing themselves into a version of themselves they think their friends online want them to be, or the algorithm wants them to be. Was this part of your research at all? And I would just love to hear your thoughts on all that.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a really good point, which is that some you actually, there's a both sides of that equation. There's people as the users themselves, they are morphing their life around social currency. And in the TED Talk, I briefly mentioned that social currency, like any currency, actually, like the dollar, is something we use to attribute value to something. And in social media, the likes, the comments, the shares, but nowadays it's also that zero point 0.5 seconds longer that you spent on an advertisement, or that meme that you sent your friend privately in DMs. These all become a recorded transaction attributing value to something. And now, to your point, that was 2017. Now in 2024, there is actual and a lot of actual real financial currency that can come from having social currency. There's things like straight up just money for posting, there's access to events, there's access to experiences. And so there is there's like this odd like, sorry, let me be clear. It's like this time of history right now where there actually is a benefit to having social currency. Now, what does that do to the individual who's trying to morph their identity around that? Well, if you are trying to morph your identity around how other people want to spend their attention, we already told you on this podcast that there's a negativity bias, which means you are eventually going to end up at the point of posting things because they're clicked on and not because it's an expression of your identity. That will absolutely be getting into unhealthy territory, and you are going to have an identity crisis at some point. And I'll tell you though, that actually happened before social media. If you listen to some of the stories about celebrity is a really interesting, really, really interesting area of research. If you ask me, I feel like if I wasn't studying this stuff and technology and whatever, I'd be studying that, because even before social media, with celebrities that had all eyes on them, they were kind of like, none of us had that before. We all have it now. But before, they were the only ones that really had all eyes on them, and people felt like they owned them to some degree, and they had to act in a certain way in order for people to show up at their shows and buy their movies and do these things. And listen, if you talk to celebrities, that is not the best part of their job. And the mental health concerns and issues that come as a result of having an identity that is at the will of others and not yourself has consequences. It creates disassociation. It creates like these feelings of, who even am I? And you will have a crisis at some point. So that's the users, that's like the poster side of things. But you also mentioned like that feeling of what it's like to compare yourself happened before, but it's happening so much more now. And I think it's really important to mention to people, and hopefully we're just, for all the listeners, I hope that we are that voice in the back of your head where the next time you're on social media and you compare yourself and you say, oh my gosh, their shirt is so nice and their body's so nice, that you remember it is a high likelihood that all of that has been staged and edited. at the very least, by the way, at the very least, let alone things created by AI and whatever. Let's just pretend staged and edited. I think by no means am I an influencer, but or like maybe an influencer in some respects, but not famous. However, I still take photo, like I still stage a photo and I still like make sure the photos are nice before they go up on Instagram, I guess. Maybe that's my generation speaking, but I do all that stuff. So then what happens is this comparison. What this social currency does is it almost makes us feel like this is an objective comparison because there's a number attached to it. But these comparisons are anything but objective. They are completely subjective. The algorithms, what is put in front of you is directed towards you. The artificial intelligence behind it is making it appear just for you. The things that you have clicked on because you were feeling down before, you're going to get more of that. So that has changed a little bit. I feel like I could go on forever about this.
The social currency thing is pretty wild, right? Because I think it's like the first time you can openly see how popular somebody is. And it doesn't have to be a celebrity. You could see like one of your friends that you like went to middle school with or high school with or college with, and you can see how many people actually like them. How many people are like engaging on a photo, and then you post a photo and it doesn't do the same. And now what's happening is you're seeing people buying fake followers. You're seeing people buying spam comments to appear like they're more popular than they are, and it's just this crazy like fire that I think just continues to grow and grow and grow and grow. And it's tough because, like you said in your TED talk, like it's here, it's not going anywhere. But the reality is, you're just seeing so many people's mental health issues exacerbated, and I think it's a result of like, I mean, everything that we've just talked about. But I think it's a big part of it is like people feel like they're not enough because the number of people that follow them or like them doesn't stack up to the people that they know.
Exactly. And that is convincing you that it is an objective comparison. Before I could just say, I think they have more friends than me, but like who cares? Like maybe they don't, whatever. But now you're saying, "Oh, well look how many followers they have. That's more than me." But oh my gosh, like it is like I said, anything but objective. It is absolutely subjective. And to your point, people are now buying the perception of this. And you can buy this in so many ways, y'all. To be a natural person that gains followers is one thing, but you can actually buy followers, you can buy engagement, you can buy it in a what some would consider a more honest way, which is just if you have money, you can put your content in front of more people straight up. You can do it. Any single person here can do it. The more money you have, the more you can tailor it, the more you can end up in exactly who's going to like it. Does that mean that you are less of a person than them? No, it probably just means they have more money, straight up. Like 100%. If we have the money, I could do it for you tomorrow. You could do it for me. We would end up being the most famous people on Instagram if we wanted to be. And the other thing is, you can also buy experiences that people want access to, called it's like the leisure class lifestyle, exclusive experiences. I really think it's important actually to weave on the framework of capitalism. And we mentioned currency, right? Like the framework of capitalism matters in the world of social media too. And if you are interested in things like the luxury lifestyle and cruising, well, all I need to do if I even have some money is go travel a little bit and get really good interesting content, and that will put my content in a category that is like the leisure class, which by the way, I've got a book over here. The leisure class has existed for a very long time, long before communications technology was even a thing. It's defined by um, abstention from productive work, as in I don't have to work, and conspicuous consumption, consuming and making it so that everybody can see that. That is probably even bigger now, right? So you have that. I mean, you have the editing we talked about, the FOMO, and or like the comparison that we make to people, but they're using all these editing apps and these, and you, oh my gosh, I could just get so motivated to talk to everybody here about camera tricks because I literally started my career in film and television. All these things you can do with the camera and with the right shot and with the right color editing to make something that is so drab in real life appear so amazing. And if you all knew this, I would hope that we would be the voice in the back of your head where you're like, okay, it probably doesn't look that good in real life. And then when we compare ourselves, if I told you I was comparing, like, I don't know, apples and carrots, you'd be like, that doesn't make sense. And we are comparing ourselves quite literally to something that is unreal. It's an unreal comparison to compare your own self to a version that has been edited and manipulated and staged and paid for. It actually is an unreal comparison. So I hope that we're that voice in your head, even though I know that you might have the first emotional reaction when you see it. Talk yourself through the logic of it. Over time, that will become second nature.
What do you think of the downstream effects of somebody who uses filters all the time?
That's a really interesting one. I don't think I've been asked that yet, actually. It's going to absolutely warp your sense of self. How could it not, really, right? Like if you, it's like having a funny mirror, and that's the only mirror that you had in your house, right? So if you're putting on a filter, if I'm just philosophizing about this out loud, like if you're putting on a filter, you are automatically inherently saying that the filter is a better version than what was there in the first place. Or why put on the filter, right? Because we wouldn't choose the worst off version, we would choose the best off version. So I think that I would have to think that engaging in that kind of behavior all day, every day is a I'm not good enough, even in a subconscious way, every single time you throw it up there. What's probably even more important to remember is for the people that do it on themselves, that's one thing, but remember, we all contribute to this digital environment and what is going to be normal and acceptable for others in the future. So that means that you're also telling young people that that's normal to do, that you as your natural self is not enough. And if that's what motivates you more, being of service to others than of being service to yourself, well, I think that's a good place to start.
What's interesting to me is like we all see the posts of people when they're super raw and vulnerable. Like somebody goes through a divorce, for instance, and they post about it and they explain how they're feeling and how horrible they're feeling, or somebody just admits that they relapsed when they were struggling with addiction, and you see the engagement is super high. People, they're getting all kinds of compassion, and people are being kind to them in the comments. For the most part, right? Most people, I would say, it's a typically a very positive experience for them because they're showing vulnerability and they're being real. But yet, so many people struggle to be authentic online. Like, why do you think that people struggle to be authentic despite the fact that they know deep down authenticity is what sells?
It's a good question. I am in this experience literally this week. We could not be talking at a more perfect time because, and I think I can just share my own experience of what it felt like, and maybe that might be similar to how others have felt when they're authentic about things that might not be perfect. I shared online earlier this week that earlier this year, my husband and I had miscarried our first pregnancy, and I can tell you what didn't happen. When it first happened, I was not sharing this online. But I'll tell you though, I promise you this, it was not because I was ashamed of it at all, actually. I feel very fortunate for that, but I was not. And it was not because I wouldn't tell you if we were talking here. It was because I had other things to handle related to this in the offline world, like my own mental health, like my own framing of it, like what does this mean in my life? And only then, when I was secure enough to handle other people's experiences, because I know my community, loving village. I knew that that things were going to come my way, and I wanted to be able to have the strength to handle that by the time I shared that story. So why I shared though was because, I mean, really, there's a whole host of reasons actually. I shared because I do believe in that authenticity. I do believe that I want people in my digital community to know that, hey, my life is not just speaking and running business and all this stuff like fun. You see some travel every now and then. That's because I think it's fun. But most of my life, but there's other things to this life that I want you to know happen to everybody. I also posted because, personal causes, women don't talk about this stuff for a very long time, even though it's extremely common. And when you share, you get resources, you get all these things that help each other. And of course, so there was like that motivation. I just knew because I have a platform and because I'm used to sharing my life in certain ways, that I can do that. I can do that in a way that doesn't take me down, in a way that is respectful. And I just think maybe it's because I'm a teacher, like because I'm an educator. I don't know what else to do with my life experiences other than make them useful for other people. And I feel like you can relate to that.
Yeah.
But to your question, what this insight has taught me is there were so many people that have reached out to me, you know, about their experiences with this, and people that we knew, that we know and have known in that time. My husband had a bunch of men reach out that I have to say I was a bit surprised at first, because of some men don't support each other in the same way, especially when it comes to fertility and life and all that sort of stuff. And they said, I didn't even tell my family, even my closest mates, about this. And so I know that this stuff can be a tool for connection and I'm able to handle it. Clearly, though, my friends who reached out to me privately were not able to handle that for whatever reason. Maybe it's cultural. Maybe they have experienced shame that doesn't come from my digital community. It comes from maybe like people that aren't even in my world, but they experience that there. Maybe they just feel that's just too exposed. Their level of privacy sharing is different than mine. Like, truly, they're like, some things are meant to be private, and that's one of the things that are meant to be private for them. That is okay to me. Truly, that's okay to me. Then the probably more maybe unhealthy for those are like some unhealthy for their mental health reasons would be like that they feel shame because of it, and that's the reason why they don't share. And that's the one that makes me the saddest, and precisely why I shared in the first place, because I don't want anybody else to have to feel shame around that stuff. But I do know it exists out there. I wouldn't have that motive, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, but I do know that there are a lot of reasons why people might not be sharing the private, vulnerable parts of their life. And I've come to believe that that doesn't mean that they're inauthentic. It just means that maybe some people aren't ready.
I would say one of the more common types of posts people make is a selfie. I would say that there's a lot of, I don't want to say controversy, but dialogue around that, because people who take a lot of selfies, some may say that person is self-absorbed, or all they care about is themselves. And other people are like, I'm just celebrating myself. I'm celebrating how I look that day. Right. But I think it can be tough, because if you're constantly posting pictures of yourself and using these filters that make you look like a different version of yourself almost, and then you're getting all kinds of praise and comments about that, I think that becomes addiction. The validation from that can become something that you get used to and you need more of. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on selfies, the filters that people are using on them, and the validation that comes with all that.
Yeah, social media narcissism. Yeah, like it's right. Absolutely. Either way, even if he, to some degree, to focus on the self, I think you mentioned like what is the intention behind it? Like most things, what is the intention behind it, I think does matter. You know, if you're saying like, hey, I'm going to celebrate my life in any form, but then you're editing it to be not the form that it was, those are counterintuitive, right? Wouldn't say that doesn't sound like a full celebration of the self then, because everything is edited and just quite literally unreal again, right? So if we're spending a lot of time on selfies, I do know that there's a lot out there about this. I haven't really thought about it as much as some other areas, but I do think that all focus on the self is not self-awareness, and the self-awareness is what we want. Why am I posting the selfies is going to matter more than just the continuous post of selfies. And am I criticizing myself every day? Even if I don't think it affects me, it affects you. Okay, you ought to be your own best friend, especially if you're going to be putting yourself out there. But if all you take in is selfies, and then it's like, okay, well, how does my hair look, and how does my face look, and did I do something wrong there? I don't know. Then you are critiquing yourself. If you don't have an extremely strong, almost disassociated in a way like perception of yourself, you're not extremely confident and happy with your offline self, that's going to be an unhelpful exercise. And that comes back to your earlier point, which is that the offline self matters most. If you are not confident, I always get the question like, oh, when should kids be allowed online? And I'm like, yeah, we can give you a general age range, I guess. But my real answer is like, you got to know your kid. I have one niece that when she was, I think, around 11. Her parents caught her in the mirror, and she was saying like unkind things to herself. And you know what they said? Oh, this, nope, you're not on social media. And she was not allowed on social media for a long time. And I think she got it like much later when she was certainly grew it to be much more confident, maybe around 16 or something. And I have another niece though. She was when she was 9, when she was 8, I was like, yeah, you'd be fine in my head, because she just had, a high level of confidence, knew what she liked, knew what she didn't like, had more understanding about this stuff because she has Auntie B in her life to teach her about it. And this matters, right? Like, you listening, even having this awareness of what we've talked about this podcast is going to change your experience of social media, because you're going to be able to say, why are people sharing? Why aren't they? What am I comparing to? What aren't they? And you're going to have real reasons to explain that to yourself. Yeah, it seems like we're saying this a lot on this podcast, but build the confidence in whatever way you need to offline, and whether it's constructing your identity, taking selfies and editing them because, or working in the world of social media and the business of you is your business, it's all going to feel different. I promise you, it's all going to feel different.
Is there like a certain amount of time that's healthy each day for people to spend on social media, like stuff like that?
So for time, I would say, just how about we just keep the start by keeping the majority in the offline world? How about that? but but also pay considerable attention to the quality of the time, even more so than the quantity of the time, because if you have even 10 minutes of something where you get abused in a comment and you compare yourself, and even if it's a 10-minute scroll on the toilet, that is going to do more to harm your mental health than spending an hour laughing on, I don't know, TikTok, right? That is going to do more damage to the mental health side of things. What will affect your productivity more? Well, that's up to you. Mental health does affect your productivity. So if that 10 minutes throws off your attention for the next hour because it's a distraction, now you're affecting other parts of your life too. So the quality of the time really does matter. In your life, I would say, be very passionate about something offline too. Find something that drives passion and goals and interest in the offline world. And other that would be a guardrail, is like helping people helping people find purpose. Might seem unrelated at first. As we propose guardrails and we talk them out and we say like what can and can't work and how are we going to do this, all this stuff happened. You mentioned the car and you mentioned seatbelts. There were a lot of people that said, don't tell me what to do, I want to drive without a seatbelt. We, as a society, eventually said, we think the best interest of society is that you don't get that choice anymore. You know what I mean? So they can still choose it, frankly. They can. I'm not going to know. But when it comes to social media, things like age limits, I already know the counter dialogue to this, but some people suggest that there's got to be identity verification, that you have to prove who you are in order to be able to have an account and speak your mind, because social media was supposed to be the public square, supposed to be the extension of the public sphere that we've had forever in democracies. But in the old version of the public sphere, I knew it was coming from you had to stand behind your beliefs and your comments and all these sorts of things. I think you would see a very different online experience if that was true. So these are the questions that we should at least be asking with a lot of seriousness.
Like, how can somebody tell if somebody's using filters or somebody's photos are fake and stuff?
It's a very good question. You can't, if we were having this conversation 2 years ago, I would have said something different. But now you can't always. So this is why I said here's the thing. 2 years ago, probably a lot of people couldn't actually. There were things that you could have done though, like would was the URL a little bit different, and actually double checking something simple like the URL to make sure that it's a verified or trusted source. Did they add just one extra letter and this isn't meant for you? Does it a year ago I would have said, does the photo, do we need some digital literacy training? Absolutely. Is the photo like overexposed? The lighting doesn't make sense. It was probably created by AI. Through training visually, you'll be able to see the difference. Upon initial reaction, you might not be able to see the difference if you don't have digital literacy. Things like, where's the initial source of this? Like I ask that question when I think a story is suspect. It's usually because it doesn't fall in line with my current patterns about things. I don't get any news from social media. Let me just tell you that right now. So here's a tip for you. I don't get any news from social media unless it pops into my feed some secret way. I don't follow any news organizations. That does not mean I'm ignorant to the news. I do have downloads and digests that I trust from journalists that I trust or respect, and I get those digests to my email every morning. So it doesn't have to be that you don't engage with anything that's going on or like you don't know what's going on. It might just be that you don't get it from untrusted random Facebook group. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I mean, I think also what I was trying to get at as we're getting ready to close is like, how does somebody know if somebody's using a filter? So if they're like feeling like they're in the comparison trap, they're seeing how somebody looks, like what are some signs that somebody is altering their image?
That is a good question. There have one of those guardrails that has been proposed by people in this space is that should it automatically tell you that it is a filtered. I I don't disagree. Here's what's going to happen though. People are going to edit it offline using Photoshop and they're going to put it on anyways. So, I would just assume moving forward that everyone has edited their photos. As I say that, I'm like, okay, there is things like made with AI stickers now and all this sort of stuff, but it's not full out there yet. If this is something that you think is important, like you are part of the digital well-being movement if you ask me. Like anyone listening, if you think, "Hey, you know what? You're right. Like everybody should have to disclose if they use a filter." You're part of the digital well-being movement. You're saying that it's not fair to people, and this is and you, like welcome to the like welcome to the movement. Maybe you will be somebody who doesn't do that anymore and who says why. I have there has always been a difference between good quality and poor quality photos. It doesn't mean that you need to be putting up photos that you don't like of yourself. It just means that maybe you put something on the bottom that's like this has been edited, right? Like no. There's no one answer to this, but you're literally in the conversation right now. So think for yourself, you know?
Well, Bailey, this has been awesome. I wanted to thank you so much for your time. I think the audience is going to really get a lot of value out of our discussion today. If people want to follow you on social media and learn more about what you're doing, where do they do that?
Okay, I promise you I will try to keep it the good side of social media. I am at Bailey Parnell on everything.
Well, cool. Well, thank you again for coming on. Like I said, audience is going to love this. Super valuable information in this conversation. So thanks again.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I hope that they take some value from it.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, I really think you're going to like this video as well. I'll see you there.